Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Welcome to our Netflix Choked webinar today. So my name is Michael Hackl from Dolby Labs. I'm located here in Munich, Germany. Along with me is Bhaskar Pal from the Dolby Mumbai team, and we have Ian Lowe in the background. And a very warm welcome to today's guest. It's Andreas Brueckl and it's Sylvester Fonseca. Hey, guys.
Hi. Hi.
So let's start with some housekeeping. So we are happy to receive all your questions. So please use the questions panel here on the right. You can just say hello, tell us where you are from, or just type in the questions that you have, and we are happy to answer them either directly, or Bhaskar will collect the questions and we'll raise them then later on in our Q&A session towards the end of the webinar. And this webinar gets recorded, so you can review it later on as well. So before we start, let's have a short introduction to, okay, what is HDR? Yeah. So basically, today's standard dynamic range technology is focused towards a very old standard that delivers just a very limited brightness and a very narrow contrast range, as well as muted and limited colors as defined by Rec 709. So watching this content on today's flat panels would just stretch the image, so distort the creative intent. So the new panels, they can show HDR content, so they are ready for the new technology. That means they can show a higher luminance values, but even more important, they can show an increased contrast range, yeah, and a wider color gamut. So thanks to the Dolby Vision process, we can now transport way more from the initially captured dynamic range through post-production, through the distribution process, and having it displayed more lifelike on today's HDR displays. So if we compare the capabilities of SDR to HDR Dolby Vision, we can clearly see that Dolby Vision HDR delivers a mechanism to transport a wider dynamic range as well as a wider color gamut from capture throughout the post-production process all the way through encoding, delivery, all the way to the consumer on their respective devices. And why do we need Dolby Vision? This is due to the differences in all the devices we consume and we watch shows. So one would use his television set, whereas others prefer to consume media on mobile devices like tablets or phones, whereas others, they use their laptops, for instance, to watch their hit shows. And all of those devices, they have very different capabilities in contrast range, as well as peak luminance and the ability to show the color gamut. So this is where Dolby Vision hits the game, and we ensure that you guys get a perceptual match of the original graded images from post-production to the consumer by using so-called dynamic metadata. And by this metadata, we describe the initially graded content and map it to the respective capabilities of the display devices. So at the end of the day, it's all about having a perceptual, a creative match between your grading monitor, your mastering monitor, and then your Dolby Vision enabled display device. And to achieve this match, we are using the Dolby Vision dynamic metadata. So a public statement from Netflix is not the most recent one, but still very valid. So of the 600 million devices members used to access Netflix in the course of a month, over 165 million are HDR configured. And 1 out of 3 smart televisions used to access Netflix, they are also HDR capable, and their catalog has more than 1,000 hours of HDR Dolby Vision content, and I'm sure nowadays we have even more. Now, before we continue to present and to introduce our guests a little bit more, Pascal, please bring up our first poll. And we would kindly ask you to answer this, describing what describes your profession best. So whilst the poll here is on screen, let me introduce you today's guests, as some of you might not have had the chance meeting them. So let's start with Sylvester Fonseca. He's trained as a cinematographer at the prestigious Film and Television Institute of India. After graduating in 2013, he worked on numerous short films and top-notch advertising campaigns over the years. With his work on Sacred Games, he hit another milestone, as it was also the first Netflix original series from India. His credits include films like Man Marcia, Choked, and Island City, just to name a few. Hey, Sylvester, great to have you here.
Hi, nice to be here.
So, and our second panelist for today, it's Andreas Brueckl, and he's an award-winning senior colorist with more than 15 years of post-production experience. So Andy worked across Europe, Asia, and the Middle East, where he created more than 1,000 TV commercials and hundreds of full-length features. In 2017, he won both Apollo Awards for Asia's Best Colorist TV Commercials and Asia's Best Colorist Movies. Since 2017, he's grading for FutureWorks Media in Mumbai. Hi, Andy.
Hello, nice to be here. Thank you.
So, first question, basically to both of you guys. Choked was meant to get in SDR only. So, can you let us know how did it turn out to get delivered in Dolby Vision then?
Okay, I start. So basically, we finished the grade in SDR, and we didn't talk about HDR in the beginning. And once I was finished, I had to wait for some VFX shots. So I had a little bit of time, and I thought it would look just amazing in HDR. So I took the decision up on myself, and I just gave it a HDR pass. Without telling anyone, I didn't inform anyone. I just made it HDR because I thought it would just be a pity not to be in HDR. And then I called Sylvester and said, "Hey, Sylvester, I have something. I think you like it." And Sylvester came, and well, then we were HDR.
Yeah.
So I assume, Andy, you only could do is because you have already worked together on commercials and I think on Sacred Games as well. Because I mean, this is a very tough decision, a very tough step. So Sylvester, I mean, what was your impression?
So I remember getting the call from him where he said that he had taken a few shots and he's done an HDR number on them. And I was a little curious. I said, okay, let's just go there with an open mind and see what it looks like, because the look was already set for the SDR version. I mean, that was the only version at that time. So I was like, okay, let's see what it is. And I went there and I remember stepping into the grading suite and I saw the monitor, and it didn't look very drastically different from what I remember grading last. So then I was like, okay, this looks good. And I was like, okay, what about the SDR version? Can I see that also? So they switched over to the SDR version, and that's when I saw the difference. I saw like, I mean, I could noticeably see the difference in especially the extremes, the highlights and the shadows. Like there was a lot more like tones and textures in the extremes, like especially the shadow regions. I felt like the HDR version was way superior. And I would also like to say that it was like more closer to what I had seen on set. It was almost like I was seeing it in reality. It was so much more immersive that way. I think it came closest to what we were trying to create in our film that way, look wise.
When talking about on set, can you tell us a little bit about the equipment you used on set? So the cameras, which lenses did you choose, and very important, how did you make your lighting decisions on set?
Okay, so for example, like for this film, we chose to work with Arri Alexas. We had two of them on set, and we had one set of master anamorphic lenses. So we felt like we wanted to slightly stylize this film, like so we chose anamorphic lenses. Also with like smaller spaces, we felt like the combination of all of that could be very interesting to work with, and I think it just come together very well. For the lighting, I mean, we had a few locations. We had a house, we had a bank, and we like also had a set, in fact, like a set of the house. So um, it was quite tricky that way, but we kind of like made a conscious choice to keeping it very naturalistic. So we uh, followed natural sources, including the practicals. Like, so we placed the practicals in like we carefully chose the practicals and positioned them so that we knew where probably the characters would move. I mean, there was no certainty, but maybe, and we simulated the practicals, so it looked a lot more natural than just like giving a broad spectrum light and stuff like that. So that way it was quite interesting to work on the project with this.
And how did
Yeah.
you check your lighting? Are you using a light meters, or what is the tools of
Yeah.
choice you use on set?
Okay, so firstly, like once you light a set, like I generally do it by eye first. Like I try to be as natural as possible. Even when I'm lighting up, I make sure that the set looks firstly convincing to me as the first audience. It looks okay. And then I usually use a light meter. I definitely check my exposures to see whether I'm happy with what I'm working with. Maybe if I want to increase the brightness more, so I have a little more say depth of field, or if I can even reduce it further if I need to. But having a light meter definitely helps, especially in judging contrast and maintaining lighting continuity. Because usually what happens is I mean, when you start your day, you're all bright and fresh and all that. But as the day progresses, your eyes get tired. So then the light meter definitely helps. Also, I also use the false color quite a bit. It is like I don't see it as a I use it in tandem with the light meter, so I know that I'm going in the right direction. Uh, so I feel like a combination of these two are absolutely essential. Sometimes also, I feel like once I've lit up a scene and I've checked all these exposures and false color, and if it's a little tricky, I take a step back and maybe even I look at my monitor. So that would be a third check maybe, but primarily the light meter and the false color for checking exposures.
Okay, so basically you're using, let's say, two main tools: the light
Yeah,
meter, your false color, and then
yeah,
sometimes you even bring in a monitor to get some objective perception.
yeah.
So this is great. So Andy, coming back to your decision when you basically decided to switch from SDR to HDR. I mean, you had to change your grade respectively from SDR to SDR. So this might be a pretty tough job. Did you use any color management for this purpose, or how did you achieve this?
Actually, it was a quite easy job because I worked in a color management environment. So basically what I did, the short answer is I just switched from SDR Rec 709 to PQ 1000 nits HDR. And because of a color management workflow, there was not much to do. It's almost there. It's a little bit fine adjustment because now we have more details in the blacks and in the highlights. And I think I will give you a long answer for it, why color management workflow or environment works. And take a little bit more time, so stay with me. So we all colorists, we in the past worked in a display referred timeline. Display referred means we have, for example, a digital film camera like Alexa, Red, Sony, whatever, you name it, and they have 15 stops around dynamic range. And our display in the end is maybe a SDR display in Rec 709 with 100 nits. So what we used to do in the past, before we had a scene referred workflow, we limited the timeline to this display. So to Rec 709 or to P3 for DCI cinema projector. But then, I mean, you get a good result. but once you render it, you're basically locked in. You can't get bigger anymore. You lose, I think you come from 15 stops and end up probably around 7 stops of dynamic range on a normal television. And that's where scene referred came in and color management workflows. So we come with these, let's say 15 stops of dynamic range of the raw footage. We go into a timeline, which is scene referred, and this can be ACES, this can be TCAM from film light, from baselight. And they have up to 32 stops of dynamic range. So I'm not losing dynamic range, I'm not losing color, I'm not compressing anything. And right in the end, at the output, I can choose my output, which is, for example, I'm grading on Rec 709, or so it's Rec 709. I'm grading for cinema in P3, or I'm grading for HDR. And I can save this whole thing as an archival master and even take it out in 5 years, and I still have the full range in it, even grade it. So that's why it's a long answer, why it basically was easy just to switch. And the second part of this answer is there are so-called DRT families. So means Baselight created families in the scene referred looks. So the one is, for example, for 100 nits brightness, which is a television. HDR has a 1000 nits brightness, and these families work together. So the moment you switch, it's basically stretching in some algorithm, and the color and the dynamic range stays exactly the same, but then of course stretched on another display device. So, but you don't have to regrade it. You can do little adjustments, but you still have or maintain the same look. And I hope this answers why it was fast to grade it.
So basically, you could retain the perception you already created for your SDR grade, but now translate it to HDR.
Exactly.
But so, and I assume you did some minor corrections to adopt now for the new display technology. What would you say? How long did this change from SDR to HDR take?
Maybe 2-3 lazy days. I mean, this was just for the fine adjustment, because now it's more range in the blacks. And where do I want to sit or have the black sitting? Do I want more details here and highlights? But 2-3 lazy days.
And so I think this is a very interesting experiment you did when you switched from SDR to HDR. Can you tell us a little bit what, or was there a main benefit you could get out of the images that were now presented in HDR?
Yes, so you have more details in blacks, definitely, which helped us a lot. Then you have more colors, way more colors. And there's another kind of, I would call it brilliance, which you don't get in SDR. It's almost like a 3D effect, because now you have, I don't know, let's say there's a gloss on the skin and this gloss comes out more. There's a eye highlight which comes out more. Little sparkles, little, yeah, it's like, you could call it a brilliance. So my SDR grade, or the perception of my SDR grade and of my HDR grade is not much different. It's just this little bit of brilliance. That's how I would describe it.
So Sylvester, would you agree on it? Was it the same perception you had when you first came into Andy's color suite?
Yeah, so I was quite happy actually when I saw it, because for me, I mean, because the film like initially starts off very dull and like a little on the darker side. It was interesting because how HDR reproduced the dark, and it wasn't dark actually, but it felt like it was dark. So instead of just like say reducing the brightness or something, so I could see the characters more clearly, but it was still dark. So I can't really explain it in words, but it was just amazing how the HDR helped the the look of the film. And like I would also like to talk about, say, like there was this particular instance of a filter we used on the lights. It was a type of a blue filter we used on the tube lights and we in the bank and the house, so to add a little bit of coldness. And I remember in the SDR version there was I mean, it was good. It was there. It was almost as good as what it was on set. But the HDR had a little depth to that blue, and I quite liked, especially when it fell on the skin tones. The way it was reproduced was amazing, actually. So that I was very, very happy with. So yeah.
Very interesting. So Andy, but I can assume as a colorist, working in SDR and working in HDR might be a little bit different. How would you describe this difference between working in SDR and then working for a HDR finish?
So first of all, you have more details. So you have to work a little bit finer on these details. You have more colors. So when I had, let's say, I always describe it with skin tones. I have now this cheap webcam, probably one skin tone. The more skin tones you get, the more precise you have to work. So that's what actually it helped me also in my SDR later, because the finer I work in my HDR, the better it turns out in the SDR. So more details, more colors. And one thing, I think that's a different, there are two different approaches on HDR. So I think when the first HDR televisions came out, and we saw them all in the electronics markets, they were just bright. So everyone assumed, I think in the beginning, even me, like HDR has to be super bright. It has to be shiny, bright. You almost get a sunburn from it, and we were all scared. And at one point, it was a learning curve. We all had to realize, no, it doesn't have to be bright. Only the peak highlights, which is maybe the 10%, maybe like here now, is reflective, or here my AirPods. This can be bright, but the rest keeps the cinematic image. And that's my approach. I keep it natural. I keep it moody as it is, as it's meant to be from Sylvester, but I just keep these little peak highlights up. So that's for me HDR, and that's my approach. Not overall bright, just where it has to be bright.
Well, and this approach basically gained lots of attraction, because the overall and this unique look from Choked is very well respected in the community, and I think lots of folks already approached you guys, so both of you, and had several questions about it. So maybe Andy, we keep a minute with you. Can you tell us a little bit about the color pipeline you used in your grading tool, and how you established this unique look?
Okay, so, but I have to say first, I mean, 80% of the look is given by the DOP. That's just, if the UV gives me a nice image with blue walls and the specific lights, that's part of the look. That's 80% of the look. So I'm just putting my little bits and tricks in the end. So the way I work is I take it, as explained before, in a scene referred timeline. And I have a color space, it's called TCAM, which takes it very clean, the cleanest way I can get a signal from the sensor. So there's no roll-off in there, there's no look attached. It's basically raw, poor. It doesn't look also very pleasing. And then I start mixing my looks. It's like mixing, I always call it mixing a digital film stock. And this takes me up to maybe 2-3 days sometimes. So I spend a lot of time in this look development, and until the point where I say, okay, my skin tone is right, my overall skin tone, my blues are right, my blacks are in this range. I have, for example, in Choke, we have a tiny little bit of blue in the blacks, not too much. I don't want it over tinted. I want the skin tones, the roll off in the skin tones in a specific way. I want, for example, in the midtones here, in this area, a kind of magenta, only here a little bit touch. And once I have my kind of setting, and of course I introduce it to Sylvester and he says okay, or he wants some changes, then basically I can copy and paste this look and start the base grade. But this is way faster. So what I spend time in the beginning, I save in the end, because my digital film stock is basically there. So I'm not creating a new look for every scene. It's one time a look, and I keep this look, I keep this film stock, like you have shot on film before. You don't change your negative in the middle of a shoot. And that's how I approach my look.
And as you already mentioned, well, Sylvester, it is you set the foundation of the look that was created on set, set by your lighting decisions, your exposure control.
Yes.
So can you tell us a little bit more about how you exposed, how you rated the camera sensor, basically everything you did in order to achieve this unique look?
Okay, so yeah, there's a lot of things, but yeah, let's start. With the camera, we for most scenes we rated at the native ISO, the 800, and I remember for especially dark scenes, there are lots of scenes where she's walking around the house without any practicals on, and the only light that's coming in is possibly like say moonlight or like street lamps, some spill of that. And what I did there was I changed my ISO to 400 and sometimes even 200. This helped me increase the tonal range, especially towards the shadow region. I felt that that helped me get a lot more detail in my shadows, which actually helped us on screen. Also, the added benefit was we had much lesser noise to start with, because on my previous projects where I didn't do this, we kept it at 800 and we shot throughout. And when we went through the post-production pipeline, only then we started seeing a lot more noise creep up. So this changing the ISO helped definitely, and I think it was a good learning for sure. um Apart from that, like say I'm a little I mean careful with the skin tones and stuff, because when your audience sees something, the first thing that they react to is mainly the skin, because that's very human in that sense. Our actors were more on the fairer side, but I didn't want them to come across on screen as being very light skinned and stuff like that. So I deliberately kind of underlit them. I kept them maybe like a stop underexposed throughout, so that they felt their skin tones and they felt more natural and blended into the environment. I think that really helped. And yeah, in terms of lighting and stuff, we also mixed a lot of colors. So we always played with, say, like mixing tungsten light with tube light, and daylight with also, say, tube light. So then there was always this conflict of colors, and always we made sure that there was some mistake in frame. For example, because we had a set, so everything was looking, say, too perfect sometimes. So we gave some stray light from somewhere, and it just had to look slightly off from perfect. So I feel, I mean, for me, it made sense, and I think it had an effect, and I felt, yeah, it worked. Yeah.
Great. Bhaskar, let's bring up our
Sorry,
second.
Michael. May I jump
Yeah,
in for a second? Because
please.
Sylvester said something super important, I think. So that you made your lighting decision one stop under on the face, right?
Yeah.
So, and usually I tell my DOPs when we make the HDR test that shoot one stop over, and I give you a LUT which renders it a little bit darker. But I think because you had so much control over your environment, that's why you could shoot one stop under. I think if you need
Yeah.
safety, shoot one stop over. If you can control your sets, I think like you did, then one stop under works. But that's, I
Yeah.
mean, you really have to control it then, right?
Yeah, I think you should be on top of it. I mean, especially with like post coming in and digital imaging and all, I think it's very easy to get lost and leave it to post. Like, and that's usually very scary for me. And having, say, learned on film, and I mean, my backbone and my basic learning is from there. So I always feel like I have to like just do it correctly to begin with, and then in post maybe, I mean, okay, you can fix minor glitches here and there and all that, but your basic look and image has to be created on camera. Like that there's no substitute for that. And if you feel like, yeah, maybe you want to do something unreal with it, or you want to like say give it a graded look or something like that, or polish it in some way, then possibly post might work. But I think for most key decisions, I feel you have to do it on camera, on set.
Right.
Yeah, what is decided there is basically what you have to work with then in post.
Yeah.
Okay, whilst we keep on, Bhaskar, can you just raise our second poll? And whilst this will be on screen, I mean, we can continue with our chat. So basically, please tell us where you guys are located. And so Sylvester, Andy, we heard a lot about, or way more about basically shadows than about highlights. So basically, this seems on a first glance very unusual for HDR, because we hear lots of folks talking HDR as bright images. Everything is super shiny. It's basically everything is in your face. And when we hear you guys talking, it seems it's way more, or at least a big portion of the new technology benefits or let us benefit from shadow details. And it seems it's way more about working in the shadows, so using this expanded dynamic range for shadow details, rather it is to present some super bright light bulbs.
Yeah, that's so
So
that is true actually. Yeah, I mean, see, it definitely it I mean, you can see it in the highlights also, but I could definitely play a lot more with my shadow region on this film. Like if you see certain practicals in the film, if someone's caught it, there's a lot more texture on the light bulbs. Like on an SDR version of it, you will not see that texture on, like, say, the light fixture. but on like the HDR version, you would probably see a pattern on it and all, which is very unusual. Usually you don't see it unless it's like maybe a film negative, and then you can pull it down, do a double pass or something like that. But over here, we didn't have to resort to as many power windows or something to pull out the detail, or reduce the highlights in a way. That was quite interesting.
So nevertheless, I mean, we heard all about the beauty of HDR. So we can still retain lots of details in the shadow regions, but still have those highly lit practicals present. Nevertheless, still the SDR version, so our standard dynamic range version, is a very important delivery. And so you've chosen for the Dolby Vision workflow where the SDR version is basically derived by metadata from your initial HDR grade. So Andy, can you tell us a little bit about this process in detail, and for sure how long it took you overall, first finalizing HDR, but then for sure deriving this SDR version using the Dolby Vision process?
Basically, it's very, very simple. Once you are finished with the HDR version, you grade everything in HDR, you go on every shot and analyze this shot. So this works automatically. So that's basically the Dolby Vision. It's called the Dolby Vision Analyzer. You put one layer, analyze this shot, and then automatically metadata are reproduced. And if you switch your monitor then to SDR Rec 709, it's basically already there. So automatically a Rec 709 version happens. And then I put another layer if I want to, I don't have to, and adjust a little bit, want it brighter, a little bit darker, whatever. So there's not much I can do after this because it's basically 90% there. But if I, for example, want the blacks a little bit brighter, that's what I can do. And the whole process took me maybe another 2 lazy days. I always have on this project there are a lot of lazy days. So I think it was 2 days. If you do it the first time, it takes a little bit longer, but it was my third project, so in HDR, so maybe 2 days.
So overall, a very convenient and effective way for you to grade in HDR first and then derive basically automatically the SDR, but still you have a final decision with the trim controls to adjust the mapping to SDR. So Sylvester, you now finalized your first show in HDR and in Dolby Vision as well. So is there anything that you would potentially do differently whilst lighting and whilst planning your next show?
See, I mean, I know that aesthetically and shot taking wise, it doesn't change much, but I know that, for example, while shaping our lights, most of our time is spent like say cutting the highlights, or like say just boosting the shadows a little bit too, so that once they go through the post workflow, they don't have like too much noise. So maybe like I might not add a net, like, so if there's a really bright window in frame, and usually we add like a single net or a double net to reduce the intensity of it, and so it doesn't clip your highlights. Maybe I might not do that. I might not need to, because I know that my HDR version will always have texture in that highlight. Or like if there is a certain scene with a lot of dark regions, my earlier approach would have been to slightly overexpose everything, so that I can like then bring it down in post and have my textures in place always, without otherwise what happens is, if I don't do that, then all the dark portions just clump up as one black mass. They don't have that separation. I mean, especially towards the toe region, that is the most exciting region, especially while shooting thrillers, or I mean, moody scenes. And that's where the fun is. And with HDR, I really like the way that it reproduces the extremes, like especially the dark regions. I could see texture in places where I wouldn't expect to see it in normal any other like a version, like an SDR version or whatever. So I was quite excited by that. But I think yeah, like also what is happening, I feel like, because the way technology is changing and more people are getting getting these like say laptops or iPads which have HDR screens, and our technology is going towards that. And I feel like we should really incorporate HDR and rethink the way we probably expose our material. Because earlier I would look at a scene and be like, okay, I know I have say 8 stops of dynamic range, and I have to place my highlights and my shadows say within that, or 10 stops or whatever. But now I know that, yeah, I can play a lot more with it in my final version, my correct delivery. I know that I can play with say like 12 to 15 stops. So I know I can push a little more in the highlights, and I can keep my darker portions maybe like a little touch darker, so I don't have to worry about it so much. So that was quite interesting, and I think it's something that I will definitely experiment more with.
It's basically so you get freed of having this compromise already in mind, where you know, okay, at the end of the day, I'm very limited in my dynamic range. And I mean, Andy, you talked about this briefly. I mean, normally the first thing you have to do is kind of squeezing in this huge dynamic range that you get from the negative, either digital or analog, and basically fit it into a kind of a narrow range. And now you have this expanded range, and it's totally up to you guys how much you use it or not, how bright you grade the image, or as with Choke, you focus more on the shadow regions, working out the fine details there.
I think I want to just add, there's this massive range, but there's only one danger if you get out of the range with highlights. So if you overexpose the highlight too much, which of course didn't happen in this film, but then you get some patches, and then I have to flare them out later on. So for example, there's a light bulb which is really over, 3 stops over, for example, to the rest of the image. Then you have to flare it out. So that's the only thing I would maybe avoid, massive overexposed highlights. But, and I mean, you have 15 stops of dynamic range, theoretically. So there shouldn't be too much danger, but that's the only thing I would avoid.
So, but basically, in this case, Sylvester, he knows how to use light meters. He made extensive use of light meters in order to prevent this. But I assume, Andy, you still have some magic to bring those overexposed highlights then down, even in HDR, to make them at least a little bit more pleasing.
I can bring them down in a soft roll-off, and I can also flare them a little bit out, so they're not getting, they lose this patchiness. But I didn't have to do it here. I think in one light bulb, a little bit in the background, I did it on Choked, but the rest was all in control.
So now we are basically exiting the professional world, because I think the one thing is always judging the image in a controlled environment. So on your HDR mastering monitor, on your SDR calibrated monitor. So basically this is all controlled, and we trust this. So I assume you watch Choke at home on various devices. So can you tell us a little bit on how you felt that your grade, Andy, translated then to the devices you guys used?
So I've watched it on my new iPhone, and it was bang on, exactly like I graded it. Then I have a very cheap HD television, and there I had to take a little bit contrast out, but it was so close. But on an iPhone, I win, and also other phones, I guess it's just bang on. So I was quite happy, because this, you never know what comes out, but with HDR was quite happy.
Yeah, this being my first HDR project, I was a little, I mean, I wasn't apprehensive about it, but I was like, okay, curious, because yeah, I've seen my images in HDR, right? And I'm like super happy about it. And I'm like, yeah, I've got all that tonal range and like the shadows and all. But I was like, okay, how is my like a general audience gonna see it? Like, say, for example, my friends, my peers, because they might not have HDR enabled screens. So I was like, okay, so any case, I always do a check with the like, say I have few devices at home. I have my laptop, I have like, say, a plasma TV, and I also use my mom's 6-year-old phone. She has a 6-year-old Android phone, and the screen isn't like the best, but I was quite happy with the way it reproduced in all these devices. And I think I think on, like, say, an iPhone, an iMac, on, and also plasma TV, it was very close to what it was in Andy's grade studio. So that was quite impressive, because I hadn't graded the SDR version, right? I mean, we only did the HDR, and the HDR was the representation of that, and it was very, very close. So we were very happy with that.
Right.
It's great. So no bad surprises, even though, so to say, Andy hasn't graded SDR.
Yeah.
SDR was derived, and he just made some minor adjustments, but yeah, it translates very well in order to grant for this perceptual match between the both SDR and HDR. So last question for today to you, Sylvester. Is there any advice that you would give to other DPs, other creatives, not to be apprehensive about HDR?
I think, yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any like reason to worry about it. Like, it just sounds like very technologically advanced, and like, I mean, it sounds complicated, but it's actually not. If you have a good colorist, like say Andy, and he has a strong team behind him, you don't have to worry about it at all. Like, they will take care of it, and you can only focus and concentrate on what's important, like the storytelling or shot design, and like say the emotion of the actors. And just make sure whatever you're seeing on screen, like in the HDR version, is correct, and they will take care of everything else. So it's absolutely nothing to worry about. But the tools that the HDR gives us is very good. Like, we can now push ourselves and now really, focus on, making our images sharper, for example, and play more with, like, say, the dynamic range. So it's quite interesting.
Great. So, Bhaskar, we reached our Q&A session. So I'm pretty sure that that we have some questions came up throughout the webinar. So can you just bring them up?
Yes, and Michael, I have kind of made a note of all the questions. Okay, so I'll also keep an eye on the questions that are coming up. A few of the questions have already been answered. Let me just, anyway, kind of, get this. So there was one question from Archit Goel. Okay, my camera is turned off. Okay, how do you choose your camera and lenses for a particular project? I think a bit has already been said, but if you want to say some more on that.
I think, yeah, maybe I think it's a more general question. Like, I think, see, every project has I mean, it's different, right? You derive your look depending on the script, and you have discussions with the director. You understand what he's trying to do. You understand his treatment and how he's going to create emotions or tension and all that. So out of all these conversations, you figure out what is the best way you can get all of these tools together and get his vision to the screen. So I mean, you can choose a red, you can choose an Alexa, maybe you only shoot with a red or only an Alexa, or you can keep switching between the 2 or 3 or Sony or whatever. That is not as important. Like, the combination of lenses, your lighting decisions, and camera, all of them equally have, or maybe some more than the others on certain projects, have equally weightage on the final look of it. You can go anamorphic or spherical, depending on also like a few other things, being like, say, like the budget, or like how big or small your shooting spaces are, or like the kind of lights you're going to work with. So all these decisions matter when I mean, all these like questions have to be asked to figure out whether you want to shoot with what package you have.
Okay, great. Thank you. So the next is, can a video, this is by Vivek Nayak, can a video graded on 300 nits be converted to 1000 nits using Dolby Vision? I think
so. It is either that Andy and I could answer. So I, from my perspective, would bring up the answer. It depends. It depends on how you approach the grade. I mean, as Andy elaborated on scene referred grading versus display referred grading, I'd say there is a chance. So if you worked in a scene referred mode, so to say, let's say in ACES or in T-Log, as Andy did for Choke, for sure, there is an option, because basically you limited then your grading not in the grade. Yeah, it was just done by a transform. And so basically, if you still have access to your grade, if you did an properly archival master, yeah, or still you have access to the original footage, you could do it. And it would be basically a kind of a similar process than Andy did when changing from SDR to HDR. Not that kind of, let's say, not that kind of dramatic change, yeah. But so overall, it would be possible using a kind of this workflow. Or Andy, what would you state to this?
Same. I mean, if it's already rendered in 300 nits and you don't have the archival mask anymore, I mean, you could still stretch it to 1000 nits, but of course you lose the fine details. I mean, it's just like you have this and stretch it up, so you don't have the gradients anymore and all this stuff. It's possible, but it would not look as nice as you do it from scratch or from a scene referred graded archival master. So both possible, but the first one, the scene referred, looks nicer, right?
The questions are raining, so I think we'll have to go a little quicker. There's a question by Manoj Kumar. Was this movie mastered for 1000 nits or 4000 nits in Dolby Vision? I think I just answered it was 1000 nits. Then there's a question from Sam. How much time did Andy spend on the HDR pass, and would you prefer starting to grade the HDR version of a show beforehand in future? I think you partly answered this, I think, in the discussion. Yeah. So
2-3 days.
One more question by Manoj. How to fix a color palette for the entire film? How do you handle the tools? I'm not sure if...
Yeah, it's not relevant for this discussion. Maybe we can talk about it some other time. Yeah, it's too long. I mean, it'll be like 2-3 days of conversations.
Can be a complete session, another webinar on just this topic. Yeah. So maybe, yeah. Okay. So Bartushan has a question. How do you choose a monitor for color grading? I think, Michael, you want to answer that?
Well, how to choose a monitor for color grading. So from Adobe's perspective, we have some minimum requirements that we hand out, so that a monitor must show up with a given performance. So those are indications about the contrast range, about the gamut, for sure about the EOTF that must be supported. And there are lots of displays in the market that meet those requirements. Nevertheless, you know, it's like whether you choose for a Ferrari or you choose for another car. Yeah, both are cars and both have 4 wheels. Both bring you from A to B. So I think it's so a good display is defined by way more aspects than some minimum technical requirements. And so therefore, my advice would be make a selection or a pre-selection, try to get those displays to your facility and have your colorists and potentially even your QC operators have a play with those monitors and get their perception, because those are the guys that work on a day-by-day basis in front of the displays, and let them evaluate the display. I don't know, Andy, how you would approach the search of a good grading monitor.
I mean, same. There are, I think, at the moment 4 or 5 brands, the major brands, and I think all of them are good. I've seen all of them. I don't see much difference. I mean, it has to be a grading monitor. It can't be something else. It has to be a grading monitor. They have their price, so they're not cheap. And Netflix gives out a list, for example, of brands of monitors which they prefer or which are allowed. So we are Netflix certified here in FutureWorks, for example. We have to use one of these brands. So if you want to work for Netflix, you have to use one of these brands, and then you can go sure they're all good. Yeah.
Great. Okay. So there are a lot of questions that have come up. Yeah. So I think it'll take me a while to go through all of them, but like I have sorted out some of them, and there are some common questions. So there are some common questions about basically how do you consider the lighting during shoot? That is one. like exposure and stuff like. So there are a few common questions like that. So maybe Sylvester, you want to just talk a little bit about that? I think you already did mention.
Yeah. I mean, like say every movie is different, and like say for Unchoked, we try to follow like say natural sources like amplify daylight, or when we were recreating daylight in the studio, we used a lot of white skimmers and bounce light on it to create daylight. We definitely, so most of the times we use say tungsten light within the studio, but on this project I was sure to use HMIs within the studio, so that it gave us the natural blue cast of say daylight versus like you probably don't get that in tungsten if even if you gel it out and all. So that quite helped. But yeah, I would always recommend study of natural light and just recreate whatever you see and maybe tweak it here and there. Yep.
Thanks. Okay, so there was one. Is it necessary to shoot with the Rec 2020 color space? Specific to, I think, camera capture. So this
Okay.
Anandu.
So yeah, I mean, I would like say on the ARRI camera, I always shoot ARRI RAW. So it is important to understand that I am shooting ARRI RAW and not Rec 709 or Rec 2020, and I am only viewing my shot in 709 or 2020 or a display LUT that maybe a colorist made for me. So my capture is happening with ARRI RAW only, like Loxy version. But so I can choose to view it in 2020 or 709. My standard is always 709.
Right. So there's one question about how the Dolby Vision metadata works. So it's the question is from Marcelo. How does Dolby Vision metadata work over multiple output? So it's not very clear what the question is. Probably.
Okay, but maybe I try to, nevertheless, I try to answer it. So basically, how does Dolby Vision metadata work? So first of all, we have the analysis Andy told us about. And the analysis, think about it, we are just analyzing each single shot of the timeline from the color corrector. So to say, creating a kind of a recipe, yeah? So we describe the tonality of each and every shot. And just by having this metadata, we can then map to various display devices. Yeah? So for instance, you are reviewing a Dolby Vision show on a television set with a peak luminance of, let's say, 400 nits. But the show was graded at FutureWorks at 1,000 nits. So basically, the television understands the metadata that gets delivered, and the display and the metadata, or the HDMI bitstream, they talk to each other. And so the 1000 nit version Andy created gets mapped to the capabilities of the 400 nit display. Whereas if I would use, let's say, a display with 600 nits, yeah, the same would apply. Yeah, so both the display, because it has Dolby technology inside, as well as the bitstream, they talk to each other, and therefore we can achieve this perceptual match. This is why we can have multiple outputs, so to say, simultaneously described just by metadata.
But you have only one file in the end, which has all the metadata.
Right. Okay, so one question for Sylvester from Prashant is, what will you keep in mind while shooting specifically for HDR, as Choked was not shot on HDR, I think.
I've already kind of answered it. Like, I mean, I won't approach it differently aesthetically, but I can rethink about the way my exposure choices are made, and like I was always a little more conservative towards the extremes, and now I can rethink that and probably not be as conservative. I definitely need to make sure my, like say, my highlights are not too clipping. Always checking with my false color and stuff. But I know that in my HDR version there is going to be a lot more detail now compared to earlier, so I can maybe not I wouldn't say I would like light lesser or anything, but for example I would maybe not give up like a bounce board where I would earlier possibly, or put a net as I was saying earlier. So yeah.
Right. So there's one more question for you, Sylvester. So
Yeah.
that's from Rishad. Can you explain the lighting decisions for the dark kitchen scenes? and also behind choosing an Alexa over others? So I think you already mentioned just now about using HMI lights for indoors, but if there was anything specific to your kitchen scenes
For the
that you want
dark
to
space,
say.
yeah. So we knew, for example, like the character is going to go into the kitchen and she's not going to have lights on because of the nature of the scene. So we had a temple sort of a thing on the wall. It had a red bulb, so we had that on throughout. And naturally, in a house like that, there would be a bulb always on. So it didn't look out of place, in my opinion. And we had like some streaks of moonlight coming in, some street light coming in. But yeah, I mean, we also gave her a torch smartly so that we could like kind of like light where we wanted to. Yeah, I mean, it was quite interesting. We like try to like just enhance the natural, whatever would be natural to that room. We just try to play with that. That's all we did. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Great, thanks. Okay, so there's one more question on. I think it's good to kind of clear it. I think we have already talked about it a couple of times, but the question was, what is the recommended image capturing format during shoot? Either RAW or any compressed format. So,
Yeah, I
Michael,
would always prefer shooting raw. Yeah.
Exactly. Then there was a question on at what stage does Dolby Vision come in the post-production pipeline?
Right in the end, basically, because I'm grading all the color space is even called Dolby PQ 1000 nits Rec 2020. That's basically the first time where I choose my color space and in 1000 nits. And then basically when I'm finished with my HDR pass on my monitor, then I analyze and make maybe adjustments. So this is the last part before rendering and exporting these metadata. So you don't have to take care about it till basically the end. The last SDR pass, and that's it.
So Bhaskar, maybe a last question before we raise up our last poll.
Yeah, there are quite a few questions. So let me quickly see which ones are the most interesting ones. Okay. Which monitors? I think we've already talked about it. The kind of LUTs being used. And then there's okay, there's a question on again, I think something to do with exposure. So does shooting on ISO 200, 400 would preserve more blacks? Do you still need to do if you are lighting for HDR? Sylvester.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't get the question really.
Yeah, I also. So it says
Yeah.
shooting on ISO 200 or 400 would preserve more blacks. Do you still need to do if you are lighting for HDR? So I'm not sure what you need to do.
I think so. I think so. But I mean, I would still. So I mean, if he's asking me whether I would still do rate my camera at ISO 200 or 400, even though I know I'm going to have an HDR out, I will still do it. It definitely helps with my tonal range if I change the ISO rating. It gives me a lot more shadow detail to play with. So yes, yeah.
Right. Great. So there's one more interesting question. Sorry, are you done?
No, all good. Let's now make it the last question, Bhaskar.
Okay. So Balaji asks, he's a colorist and he's asking, is it not as advisable to grade on HDR and then move to SDR?
Yes, it is definitely. It saves time. HDR pass, then the SDR, Dolby Vision pass, definitely. But in this case, basically, I had the SDR first because the first question of this webinar was like, we didn't think of HDR at the point where we started grading, and then we switched it. So usually you start with your HDR first and then go with your metadata basically on SDR. Right.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. So there are a few more questions. Oh, there are quite a few that have come in. So you haven't even had a chance to look at them. But I think that these are all.
Continue.
Yeah, I think so. Just for the benefit of everybody, all the attendees, if because of time, I think we can't answer each and every question of yours. Although I think there are common questions, so a lot of your questions have been answered already. And whatever we could not answer, if there are any specific questions, we would try and revert to you on emails with answers to your questions, or we'll provide you links to resources that we have, which will give you more information on that. Okay,
So,
over to you,
let's
Michael.
bring up the last poll, please. So let us know if you how you rated the webinar. Important for us. Let us know what we can improve. I hope you all found this very useful. I learned a lot from today's panelists. So this was really great. So next one, I think, Bhaskar, this is enough. We can stop the poll now.
Yeah,
and I'd like to
allow a few more seconds. I can see people are still kind of putting in the votes. So yeah, just okay. I think we are done. Thank you very much, and back to.
Last information to share with you. So if you want to know more about the Dolby Vision process, and if you'd like to get in contact with us, so please visit our new content creation help center. It's contentsupport.dolby.com. You'll find lots of resources, lots of informations, videos, other webinars we presented in the past, and for sure within the next week we will post today's webinar here as well for review purposes. So nothing more to add from my side besides thank you very much, Andy. Thank you very much, Sylvester, for being our guests today. It was really great.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for sure, Netflix, letting us talk about this amazing show. And thank you very much, you guys in the audience, for all your questions and all your attendance. I hope you enjoyed the webinar. Thank you very much. Stay safe and have a wonderful evening. Bye-bye.